Hi everybody, Jeremy Siskind here. I'm the author of the Jazz Piano Fundamentals series. I'm the author of solo standards for piano. Really, I'm the arranger. Here's another book. Ooh, I just hit the microphone. I hope that wasn't crazy loud. From the Jazz Piano Fundamentals series. And don't forget, pick yourself up a copy of Playing Solo Jazz Piano. This is all available on jeremysiskind.com. I've got some nice bundles set up for you. And one of the things that I'm obsessed with, other than Powerpuff Girls, I don't know. I'm just going for something, is how one musical phrase leads to the next, right? This is one of those non-note things that separates the soloists who really tell a story and connect with us to those that are just kind of playing licks, right? I don't want to be a soloist who just plays licks. I want to be someone who, starts from here and guides the listener from one phrase to the next. Now, a lot of this is intuitive, right? I don't think that most players are thinking super analytically from one phrase to the other, but there are some things undoubtedly that we can learn, that we can pick up. And so I want to guide you a little bit through a solo that I love. I've referenced it quite a few times on my channel, and it's actually a transcription project that you can do in Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2. And this is a solo by the great saxophonist Hank Mobley. And I want to look through it and see how much we can deduce what's the relationship between one phrase and the next. So let's take a look. Let me play these first 16 bars of the solo for you. I don't give out copies of transcriptions, so don't ask me. But if you have Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2, you can go to the unit page and you can find my version of this transcription. All right, so our question here is looking at each phrase. How does it relate to the next one? And now there's a lot of subjectivity in here. I don't claim to be giving God's only answer, including their subjectivity of what constitutes a phrase. So just roll with me. I think this will be useful, regardless of whether or not you exactly agree on my definitions of a phrase. So first of all, I would say that this looks like a phrase to me. Okay. Such a great solo fill. I love it. Using the harmonic minor scale, D harmonic minor. So let's call this the next phrase. And if we're looking at how the red phrase relates to the blue phrase, I would say, this is the dictatorship here, that these two have the same rhythm. Okay. Now, if we then call this next one the red phrase, I would say two things. It's the same rhythm with a pickup. And there's a stepwise connection, right? It's not just leaping to another part of the scale of the instrument. Okay, then we're going to have a green phrase, and we can say that that's the same rhythm, without that pickup. And again, we're making a stepwise connection from where one phrase ended and the next one begins. And we could say really all of those same things about the next phrase. It's the same rhythm with a pickup. Now you'll notice it's not holding, but we still have this very clear one and. So it's the same rhythm with a pickup. And you can see that the two phrases are linked by step. The green phrase ends on a D, and then the red phrase ends on a C. Sorry, the red phrase starts on a C. Okay, so what have we learned so far? We've got repeated rhythms, sometimes adding a pickup for variety. And a lot of these phrases start just a step in the scale away from where the last one ended. Okay, so that's what he's doing here. in these first few measures. So listen again with that in mind. Now, we could look for other things. Like we could notice here that there's a bigger sequence going on. We have these purple phrases are going down by step, and then the green highlighted phrases are going down by a fifth. So there's also this element of a sequence. Right? Again, do I think that Hank Mobley was like thinking about this as he was playing? No. Is he maybe subconsciously doing it the way that, people who are really good storytellers in their native language form connections subconsciously when they tell a story? Yeah, I think that kind of thing is happening. And it's clear that he's paying attention to what he just played and building off of that, rather than just looking at the changes, right? And thinking, what's the good scale to go with the B flat major 7 or whatever the chord might be. All right. And then I think there's a really obvious connection between these two phrases. I have a little exercise that you can find in Jazz Piano Fundamentals book 2 called the telephone game, where you start a phrase with where you just ended a phrase. So he repeats these two notes as the beginning of the next phrase. Now, just to point out to you, maybe this is obvious, but this is happening on different beats, right? The F to B flat happens first on beat 1 and then on beat 4. This is pretty common. We can call this displacement. And this is one way that you can form a sense of syncopated rhythm in a jazz solo. Okay, but that's not the end of the phrase here. I have a little conflict of what exactly to call a phrase. Let's go ahead and just call this a phrase. And then this feels like a phrase. We could certainly also say that these phrases are linked, because really this is just a scale up and then a scale down. And you could see that if we are calling these two different phrases, they're again connecting by step. Now, I think it is very interesting to look at the end of this phrase and see how it's connected. So there's two big points of connection. First of all, the rhythm is 1 and, right? And we've seen that rhythm again and again and again and again in bars 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And pitch-wise, we saw these two pitches already ending the phrase in bar 5 and then starting the next phrase in bar 5, right? F to B flat, which happens to be the 5 to 1 in this key of B flat. So we have this feeling of symmetry because of all the internal repetitions going on, of rhythms, of pitches. And, if we really wanted to point it out, we could point out that we also have that symmetry, that B flat to F going here, da-da, ba-dum. Okay. So it's really quite a remarkable 8 measures, in my opinion. So let's listen one more time. Right, and if you do a little bit of analysis, you'll find that he's not using any non-chord tone, or at least in a prominent way. There's no chromatic notes that are outside of the natural scale for these chords, the expected scale. So he's able to form this incredibly memorable solo without using any, quote unquote, extra chromaticism because of all of these brilliant internal relationships. Okay, so then I think this is probably a tough moment to see how bar 9 is related to bar 8. And it's arguably not. So we could say that bar 9 is just a start of a brand new thing. I think that would be a very, very legitimate interpretation. We could also look and say that even though they're an octave away, B flat and A are two pitches that are right next to one another. But I don't know that our ears are necessarily picking up on that. I don't know. Now here's a really interesting moment. So we can hear that he's using this, I call this a compound melody, where there's this obvious A to A flat to G melody, but there's also some other notes in there, these repeated C's. Okay, that doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about. But he picks up the next phrase, he's got a little gesture, a little ornament with the pickup, but he basically continues this descending melody, right? A flat, G, G, F, E, D. So even though it's not obvious because of that pickup, he's picking up, pun intended, I guess, right where he left off on that G and continuing downwards. And we can see that same thing happen in this next section. So he does this really cool Carmen quote. And it's not necessarily, it might not look obvious that he's continuing on this line, but we can see if we look closely and listen closely that A goes to A flat to G to F to E flat to D to C. Right? These are what the brilliant improvisers do. They're not just playing scales, there's a bigger structure here. Right? And you ask, well, does he really mean that? Look, it's on all of the strong beats. Beat 3, beat 1, beat 3, beat 1, beat 3, right? And then eventually on beat 4. But it's very intentionally marked in there. Now we did skip over this phrase relating to this phrase, and arguably, it kind of again sounds like a new thing. Now notice that the new thing, when it does happen, is kind of happening every 8 measures or so, right? On the big sectional points. Okay. I don't see a really clear connection between the end of 20 and the beginning of 21. Let's listen one more time. Yeah, if anything, it does, again, a lot of times what I'm doing here is I'm ignoring the pickups because they tend to obscure. They're just little additions. And it does kind of feel like it's picking up somewhat where this left off. We end with that F, and then we start with an E flat and an F. But it's super debatable, I could just be totally cherry picking these examples to match my thesis that there's strong connections here. Speaking of which, I love the connection. So again, he goes back to this F to B flat kind of motif. And he actually plays a really, really similar, maybe exactly the same to what he played earlier. Da, 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 da. He probably practiced that a lot. Interestingly, it starts on beat 3 there, but beat 1 here. Now, again, you could think I'm making this up, but we take this leap up by a fourth, and this becomes a motif. We're leaping up by a fourth, down by a fourth, up by a fourth, down by a fourth. And it's interesting, we have the same relationship between an end of a phrase and beginning of a phrase that we had earlier, right? Here we ended on this B flat and start on this A. Here we end on that B flat, and without the pickup, we start on that A. If we do want to make an argument for octave displacement, we could make it here, right? We're starting on D, we're ending a phrase on D, and then we're starting the next phrase on C. Right, if I displace it by an octave, it would really flow. And look at the ending, it's that same one and, right? In a fourth that we've had as a motif from the very beginning. So there's a really fine line, or I should say that there's a lot of overlap between what we might consider just a habit of a musician. Oh, they do this a lot. Hank Mobley likes to end phrases on one and. He likes to do a leap of a fourth. And then what intentionally is kind of narrative building. And I'm not here to say it's one or the other, but we can learn from the habits or the narratives of the great soloists like Hank Mobley. And let's just take a little bit of a review of what devices we found. And I'm not trying to be a genius here, but we found that a lot of phrases either connect by step or connect by repetition of the end of the previous phrase, starting where you left off. We found a lot of repetition of rhythms. We used the telephone game a little bit to connect between the end of one phrase and the beginning of the next. Sometimes there was connection using octave displacement. Sometimes a rhythmic motif was repeated or developed, sometimes on the same beat, sometimes on different beats. Sometimes through compound melody, we found that even though melodies don't look related, they might continue on. And then we found that we could sometimes ignore pickups in order to see the true relation between different phrases. Okay. Well, if you watched this far, thank you. You're engaging my nerdery. You're supporting my nerdery. I love talking about this kind of stuff. If you like this level of nerdery, you might like playing solo jazz piano. And if you're looking for things like the telephone game to practice, you might really enjoy Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2. Use the word telephone in your comment if you made it all the way to the end of this video. Thanks for watching, everybody.